The Lincoln-Douglas debates were unlike any political debates you have ever seen. They took place 100 years before television. In order to reach a tenth of the people candidates can reach today through television, Lincoln and Douglas had to debate each other over and over again, in person, before different crowds.
You mean like a traveling roadshow?
Exactly. And it was quite a show. Imagine for yourself a dusty little prairie town in Illinois. Corn rustling in the August heat. Small courthouse square all decked out with flags, party emblems, brass band. Farmers in their shirt sleeves, local dignitaries in their black frock coats and tall beaver hats. Douglas would arrive on his private train, carrying a cannon which would boom out a salute as he stepped down into his personal carriage. Picture him, short, powerfully built man, a man of great self-confidence, dressed in the best clothes of the day. Lincoln, on the other hand, would arrive on ordinary passenger train. No carriage picked him up. He had to walk to the platform in the courthouse square. He might wear a shabby old frock coat, sleeves 2 inches short of his wrists, trousers several inches short of his enormous feet. He was a tall man and a shuffler. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been greater. The issue they both debated, as you know, was
slavery.
Well, let me tell you how I feel. I don't want him here, and I consider it as a personal insult that we're even considering it.
You see it as a racial issue, Jenny?
Yes.
Oh, come on. It's not a racial
issue.
No. Let's see if we can find out, all of us. Would you be inviting James Boyd to speak here if he was saying that whites were inferior to blacks instead of the reverse?
Sure.
Well, yeah, the reason we're talking about inviting him is because we believe, well, I think we all believe, that it's important to hear all points of view. It's not a question of whether or not we agree with him. We're supposed to try and get speakers who make us think, challenge us. I'd like to hear him.
But he's crazy.
His ideas are crazy, but he's not crazy. He's a famous scientist from the university. That's what we've been talking about for the past 2 hours.
2.5 hours. Come on, we've been here since 3 o'clock. I gotta get home. Let him come. At least he's not gonna bore anybody to death.
He's no expert on heredity.
But that doesn't matter, Michael. He's a legitimate scientist. A person doesn't have to be an expert on something to have an opinion on it.
No, and remember also, Professor Boyd merely has an opinion. His theories have never been proven.
But they've never been disproven either. I agree with Sam. We never get to hear unpopular ideas. At least it'll get us thinking. Let's hear him and make up our own minds.
But we know he's not going to convince anybody.
Well, how do you know that?
Because what he's saying isn't true. He's a racist.
All of this material speaks about Professor Boyd's theories and about people's reactions to his theories. He presents himself as a scientist.
Well, which do you think he is, Mrs. Dunn?
I don't know. I've never heard him speak. But if we're going to decide in advance that he's a racist and that his main purpose in coming here is to stir up trouble, there's no point in the world in asking him to address us.
Well, then what would be the point in inviting him to speak here?
The point is that everybody deserves at least a hearing.
But if Jenny's gonna be upset, then a whole lot of other people are gonna be upset too.
Yes, that's very true. Reed, how do you feel about it?
Well, I don't think I'm gonna like it, but I guess I can handle it.
Corinna.
I'm sure I wouldn't take it personally. I hope that man makes a fool out of himself.
By speaking, he may well discredit himself. From all these clippings, we can see that he has never been well received wherever he has spoken. People have had strong objections to his arguments. And there's no way of being sure that he may not stir up trouble here. I want you all to be aware of that.
You mean we might have a fight on our hands?
So what can happen? So we'll have a few arguments with people. You know, the point is not so much what he's saying, but that he does have a right to say it.
Not in my opinion.
Well, many will agree with you, Jenny, whites as well as blacks.
Like me, for example. I think the guy's a nut. I'm not going to vote to have him.
He's not a nut.
Now, we've talked long enough. Let's vote. All in favor of asking James Boyd to speak here at the spring assembly, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
The ayes have it. Andy, you'll write Professor Boyd. Ask him if he's available to speak at the spring assembly. What are you going to do tonight?
Tonight,
What's that?
same thing that you're going to do.
Papers?
Yes.
There's a good opera on tonight.
I know. I'm going to try and do both at the same time. which is
Yes.
difficult.
Take a little time
Yes.
out and listen
I
to
think,
the
yes,
opera.
I think that
Yes.
should be considered
What
as
is that?
well.
No? Oh, fine. How's Bob? Not until Thursday. No, I haven't eaten yet. Why don't you come over here? You can bring your pizza and I'll make a salad. We can listen to the opera. Good. About 6 o'clock. Bye-bye.
Are you part of that stupid committee? The ones that are inviting that racist professor?
You know I'm on it, Mary.
Listen, do you got rocks in your head? Do you know what you're doing? Do you know you're inviting that man to come down here and speak his garbage?
But I'm only one of the committee.
Baby, if you stick with that group, you ain't gonna have a friend left in this school.
You're crazy. You've forgotten who you are. When was the last time you looked in the mirror, huh? You're black, baby, you're black. I can just imagine you sitting there with the committee going along with the crowd saying, it would be a good intellectual experience for us to have a racist address the student body. And maybe you even go along with him. You sure must need friends bad.
Tom, stop acting so stupid. You know I can't possibly agree with him.
But you still think that racist has a right to speak in our auditorium.
What I think he has a right to is free speech.
I think it's such a stupid idea. Why ask for trouble? I don't understand Victoria, and right before she's retiring.
I know. Maybe what this Boyd says is true. I'd hate to admit some of the thoughts I've had on the subject at times. But that's beside the point. Some things are better left unsaid. Does Victoria explain anything to these kids or just give them the reins?
This kind of idea should be aired before mature audiences. Now, I know my students. In my classes, we discuss all sorts of things that arise out of the literature we read, but this thing is too hot to handle.
What are you talking about, this James Boyd thing?
Yeah,
You're opposed?
very.
It's not such a big deal. He's a crackpot, that's all.
I think it's a little more serious than that, Stan. Many of the black students are very upset. They're hurt and insulted, and you'd be surprised how many of the white kids go along with them.
So?
So I think we should do something to prevent Boyd from speaking here.
Oh, come on, Joan. Just because you don't like what a man says doesn't mean he should be prevented from speaking.
The point is that there are a lot of people The majority, I'd bet, who don't want this kind of question raised here. I think we have to honor that majority.
What about the minority? Who honors them?
Honor. How can you two talk about honor and James Boyd in the same sentence?
Look, I don't even know the man. Forget about honor. My point is this. Just because he's in the minority doesn't mean he should be denied the right to speak his mind. I don't agree with him, but I think he's got the right to express his opinion.
I don't have any objection to Boyd speaking, but not here. Maybe in 10 years, but not now.
Miss Wilkins, I gotta talk to you.
Sure, Tom. What's up?
Have you heard that the current events committee has invited James Boyd to speak here?
Yes.
Well, what are you gonna do about it?
Nothing. He has a right to speak his mind.
What do you mean, speak his mind? You know what he's gonna say.
Just because a man says something doesn't mean it's true.
Well, I don't care. They have no right to bring him here.
They have a right to invite whomever they choose. And it was done by vote, I'm sure.
Well, what about my rights? Am I supposed to sit there, listen to him insult me and do nothing? Have you read the kind of stuff he says? It's garbage.
Got a minute, Victoria?
Oh, sure, Betty. What's on your mind?
Victoria, there's a lot of unhappiness around here about your committees having invited James Boyd to speak here.
Betty, life consists of pleasant and unpleasant things. You can't live and shut your ears to the unpleasant things. I've always taught my students, I'm sure you've taught yours, that the more ideas they're exposed to, the better. And that includes painful ones. You can't teach just the pleasant things and blot out the rest. That would be unfair and unrealistic. Life's too complicated for that.
I agree with you, Victoria, of course, in principle, but when you read a book or when we discuss it in class, we're in a controlled environment. But it's one thing to read something, and it's quite another to hear it aired publicly. I'm afraid that many of our black students are going to be truly hurt by what this man says. I think you'd better speak to the members of your committee.
No, I've never interfered with their decisions. I trust them, and they know it. I can't and I won't restrict them. That would be like censorship. Like you're telling a student that he or she could not read a particular book.
Oh, Victoria, reading a book is quite different.
No, I think they're one and the same.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I know, Mrs. Fisher. But Mrs. Dunn likes her students to make their own decisions. No. Yes. I'll be looking into it, but I can't promise you anything. Yes, I'm sorry, too.
That prejudiced bastard, what is that, crazy?
Why don't they invite Adolf Hitler? Those two get along just fine. I heard about him. You know what he goes around saying? You can prove blacks are inferior to whites, and he's a professor at the university.
I'd like to see them invite somebody that said whites are inferior to blacks.
Yeah.
They are crazy, and the people that invited him's crazy, too.
Gonna speak over my dead body. We go to this school, too.
Thing down.
Staying after school won't improve your grades, young man.
How are you?
Well, as a matter of fact, I've had a good day. I finally made Teddy Avalon realize that there was a difference between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
He'll never be the same.
How are you?
Pretty good. Looking forward to vacation.
What's on your mind, Bob?
Victoria, there's a lot going on. I'm getting letters, calls. The entire community's really up in arms about this Boyd thing. In the beginning, I didn't take it very seriously. What the committee does is their business. I know their purpose is to provoke, stimulate, to invite controversy, and that's fine. But I'm afraid in this case they've bitten off more than we can chew.
What are you trying to say?
Look, Victoria, I don't have to tell you how fond I am of you. How much I admire you as a teacher and as a person. You've been an enormous help to me over the 3 years that I've been here. Probably more helpful than anyone else. Certainly in regard to dealing with the board. But, well, I'm having to ask for your help once more. Would you ask the kids to at least cancel Boyd for now and wait until next term when we can discuss this more thoughtfully and reconsider the whole matter?
In other words, you want me to say to them when things get tough, it's better to cop out? I can't do that, Bob. In the first place, I haven't the right. The committee makes all the decisions.
Oh, come on now, Victoria. I know you could find a way to do it.
I've never said do this, do that.
Well, you could just this once. Tell them the truth. The community's upset over their decisions in this case, and it would be best if they canceled, or at least postponed the speech. Look, I'm sure they'd understand. There are 3 blacks on the committee, aren't there? They must have sensed what this is doing to the school.
Bob, James Boyd has his theories. That's all they are. Hypotheses. They've never been proven. I think he has a right to his theories. They're unpopular and unpleasant. But not letting him speak here isn't going to make these theories disappear.
I agree. He has a right to his theories. But I think the risk of him speaking here is too great. And here is my concern.
Well, what risks are you talking about?
Confrontation.
I think we can handle confrontations if they happen. It's not as if the students didn't have alternatives. In the first place, they don't have to come. If they don't want to hear what he has to say, they can stay away. In the second place, I'm sure you'd have no objections to their picketing the speech if it comes to that. But I have faith in the students' ability to handle the situation. I'm surprised that you apparently don't.
I do trust them, Victoria. It's not that I don't.
Well, then give them a chance.
I don't think this is an appropriate time for that. I'm responsible for what happens here, and I'm reluctant to take responsibility for something I'm opposed to.
I'll tell you what. Why don't you come and talk to them tomorrow afternoon? The committee is having a meeting. You can present your point of view then.
It's a deal.
Well, you've heard what Mr. Newcomb has said. How do you feel?
Where do we go from here? A lot of what he says is true. We are causing disruption.
That doesn't bother me so much as the possibility that we're being labeled troublemakers. I'm having enough trouble getting into college as it is. I don't need this, too.
Marty, who said this could have anything to do with your getting into college?
My advisor, Miss Whitney.
I see.
If so many people hate this guy and feel so strongly against him, maybe we should forget the whole thing.
Oh, come on, Marty. I was opposed to the whole thing from the very start. But you're the one who said we were supposed to be broad-minded and not judge him before we'd heard him.
Yeah, but I didn't know this thing was going to cause so much trouble.
What a hypocrite. You're only broad-minded when it's easy.
I'm not a hypocrite.
No, let's not call names. You've all heard what Mr. Newcomb wants, that we should be responsive to the community's wants and needs.
So what you're saying is that we should give in to the pressure.
But just temporarily.
Well, what should we do?
It's a question of judgment. You must consider what Mr. Newcomb has said, what the community has said, what your fellow students have said, and whether or not you jeopardize yourself in any way. You must not make a casual decision.
What do you mean, jeopardizing ourselves?
Well, I guess I mean the First Amendment. The rights that we have because of the First Amendment. The right to freedom of expression. That's really what we're arguing about, isn't it?
Come on, let's vote and get it over with.
All right, Reed?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Janet?
No.
Sam?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Marty?
No.
Corinna?
Yes.
Jenny?
It's the committee. We discussed all the choices, and we feel that James Boyd is the one who...
Michael, that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. The committee. Mrs. Dunn makes the decisions, doesn't she?
No, she's only the advisor. We make the decisions ourselves by vote. We feel that...
You're too young to understand what's at stake here. You can't make such decisions for the whole school. I'm surprised at your Mrs. Dunn. She should know better. What's an advisor for, anyhow? To give advice to people who need it. She's certainly been around long enough to understand that.
Almost finished, Ron?
Yeah, I was a little late because Sally was late with her story on last week's track meet. But here it is. Okay.
Well, Ron, I think we're going to have to leave the Boyd announcement in. But if I were you, I'd change the tone of the editorial a little.
Why? I always comment on controversies and things.
I know, but this is different. This whole thing is causing a lot of trouble around here.
I'm a member of this community too, and I pay taxes like everyone else to support this school. And I'm not paying to have someone like Boyd come in here and insult me. That's not freedom of speech, that's racism. And believe me, I can tell the difference.
And it was poor judgment for the Current Events Committee to invite him. But I think we better hear him out.
Agreed. This man has the right to his opinion. That's in the Constitution. But when his rights start to infringe on my rights and the rights of everybody else, then we got trouble.
I'm just struggling with why James Boyd has to speak here. I think when you allow a man like that to speak here, you're opening up the gates for any nut to come in here and to speak to us. And I think we really have to look to see what's to be gained out of that. And I really don't understand what we're going to get out of having James Boyd speak here.
The question isn't what is to be gained, but what is to be lost. I think we have a great deal to lose.
I think the students, besides the ones that are on the committee, have something to say about this. And you're all just sitting here on your dead butts, and you're not even taking any consideration to what people like us have to say about this kind of thing. I think it's a threat to race relations.
You know, some of the best ideas in history have come from minority opinions that a majority chose not or tried to suppress. I think we have to think very carefully before we decide what people can hear and what people can't hear.
That may very well be true, but I do not see why we cannot just this once bow to what the majority of us want to do.
Yes. I'm sure we'd all feel very safe and secure if we could stop James Boyd from speaking. But I don't think our personal comfort is the important thing. It's easy to do the safe thing. It's sometimes much more difficult to take the risk. Some of you remember when our country imprisoned thousands of Japanese because they were afraid they were subversives. They virtually threw them into internment camps. They temporarily suspended their constitutional rights. I'm just saying these are the risks we run when we tamper with our basic rights. Once you've banned speech, it's just a step toward banning other things.
Banning anybody.
Well,
Well, Stan, where were you?
You've been here 30 years, Victoria. I'm coming up for tenure next fall. I'm not about to get booted out of here on charges of insubordination.
Insubordination?
That's what they call it.
It's just temporary, Margaret.
But that's censorship, Mr. Lawrence.
Oh, come now. Removing a couple of magazines from the shelf is hardly censorship. Suppose you had never selected the magazines that carried the articles on Boyd in the first place. It's not censorship. It's selectivity.
It's not as if we're asking you to burn them. We're just recommending that you temporarily make these magazines unavailable. It's as if they're out on loan. As a matter of fact, we can handle it that way. I'll check them out on loan, and that'll be that. Would that make you feel better?
Not really. And besides, I can't check materials out to anyone but faculty and students.
Well, okay. We'll see Mr. Newcomb. And while we're at it, Margaret, do you happen to have a current list of the books here?
Good morning, ladies.
Morning, Mr. Powers.
Come to see how a modern, sophisticated, small-town newspaper operates?
Well, some other time, perhaps, Mr. Powers. No, what we've come about is, well, frankly, we were surprised to read that article in the paper about the PTA meeting the other night.
Oh, did I spell a name wrong, or was there a dangling participle?
Well, maybe I'm not making myself clear. We were surprised that you covered the event at all.
I cover all the PTA meetings, certainly this one.
Maybe this is the one you shouldn't have covered quite so completely.
Oh, why not?
Because the subject is getting to be rather unpleasant.
Look, Mrs. Spellman, half the things I write about are unpleasant. Burglaries, murders, deaths, I can't help it. If it's an ugly story, it's news. It's not as if I'm endorsing what Boyd says. I'm merely reporting on the controversy.
Well, we understand that, but, well, perhaps you could play it down a bit.
Have you two ladies heard of freedom of the press?
Yes, Mr. Powers, we know all about that. But that's not the issue. Don't you think the paper should have some sense of responsibility as well as power? Don't you think it should be held accountable for the effect it might have in a situation?
Mr. Powers, as you're well aware, my husband places full-page ads in your paper on a regular basis. Now, he's not happy with your coverage of the controversy, nor is he happy to have his ads in the same paper with the Boyd ads. And he's not alone.
Any changes?
No, run it as is.
Okay.
They were really upset when we said they couldn't use that meeting room. They scheduled that meeting a month ago. We agreed to let them use the library. I'm not sure we did the right thing.
Arthur, we're like every other community agency. We answer to the community. So the majority of the board decided that letting a speaker who advocates legalized marijuana use the library just wasn't the smartest thing we could do at this time. In view of the fact that our request for additional funding comes up for vote next month.
It's all because of that flap over at the high school, isn't it?
I guess so. A lot of people around here are taking a second look at just how permissive the schools and other public institutions are. Hi, Ron. Hi. Sally.
Mr. Burnett will no longer be with you. His wife just had a baby, as you know, and he wants some more time to spend at home, so I'm your new advisor.
Okay.
I'm sure we'll follow much the same procedures that you did with Mr. Burnett. It's just that in the future we'll want to be a little more responsible. I have some guidelines here that have been drawn up for you. Why don't you two look those over and let me see what you have here.
Well, thank you. You all know Reverend Stewart, who is head of the PTA, and Mr. Timmons, chairman of the Board of Education. John Lambert of the Union Bank, Jane Stock of the Neighborhood Association, and one of our parents, Michael Lintz, Corinna Davis, Andrew Sue, Sam Samantha Fold, Reed Wilson, and Joanna Dawkin, who is head of the student organization of the school. Mrs. Dunn, you all know, of course. We thank you for coming. Please be comfortable. Let's listen to one another. Mrs. Dunn, this is your committee?
Well, we've lost a few, but this is the committee.
First of all, I want to make something absolutely clear. We haven't come here to force you into anything. We have much too much respect for all of you and Mrs. Dunn to ever do that. We just want to talk to you, to explain some things to you. Walter, why don't you kick it off?
All right. Well, let me say that I think that you all as a group have done a great job. That you've had speakers come in here and talk on subjects of great value. But now, I feel very strongly that you have made a mistake by bringing James Boyd here. He's not the kind of man that we would like our children to be exposed to.
Let me come in here, if I may, Walter.
Sure, Howard.
The point is, when you let somebody like Boyd speak here, you run the risk of legitimatizing his views. Do you understand what I mean? You make what he has to say seem respectable. Now, what we're talking about here is racism. Letting Boyd speak here is encouraging racism, admitting that it exists as a legitimate area of discussion. Now, suppose, and I'm sincerely afraid this might happen, some students are persuaded by what he has to say. Young people are very impressionable, you know.
I don't think that's the issue, Reverend. The real issue is one of rights. Personal rights. Whose are to be respected? Now, we all know Boyd has the right to speak. However, there are people who feel his views are threatening and offensive. They have rights, too.
I agree with you in part, Jane. James Boyd's ideas are unpopular and antagonizing. But I don't think unpopularity justifies repression.
For God's sakes, Victoria, who's talking about repression? We're just saying, let the man talk somewhere else.
I think the risk is in repressing James Boyd, not in permitting him to speak.
I disagree. If he doesn't speak here, we know nothing will happen. If he does speak here, something might happen.
Well, if we don't have Boyd come here, we're shutting the door on a lot of other things. Even like the kind of meeting we're having right now.
May I say something? It's my job as head of student government here to act as sort of a link to the community. I mean, let the students know what the community wants and vice versa. And then to work things out so that both of us are happy. What I'm saying is that I've learned it's necessary to cooperate sometimes. I mean, to compromise about some things so that each side gets a little of what it wants. I really think that's important.
But there's no way to compromise on this sort of thing. Either Boyd speaks or he doesn't.
Yeah, but if you give in here, maybe the others will give in some other time.
The man has a right to speak. Look, I admit we're compromising this issue of free speech. Just a little bit. But there are times when you have to compromise. What harm will it do if we prevent one man from speaking one time in one place? You're the history teacher, Victoria, and I challenge you to come up with one time in this country's history when rights were taken away and they were not restored.
We've been lucky in this country. The system apparently does work. But I think that every instance like this contributes to the erosion of our rights. It sets a bad precedent. It makes people think twice before they dare exercise their rights. We're the only country in the world that has absolute freedom of speech. If we don't exercise it, it dries up. If we tamper with that freedom, we do so at our own risk. What I'm saying is that we can never be prepared for everything that might happen. The whole concept of order in this country is based on the fact that no one must ever be denied the right to speak.
I've got to get back to the office. Corinna, Michael, what do you say?
I'm still for having Dr. Boyd come to speak here.
Me too. I'm still in favor.
What he says, wrong as it may be, isn't as important as his right to say it. I still vote yes.
Reed? Andy?
Yes.
Yes.
Victoria, do you have anything else to say to them?
No, I don't think there is anything else to say.
Well, could we ask you all to leave the room for a moment? Oh, you can stay, Victoria.
No, Walter, I'll wait outside. Now, a few final things. This is our last class this year. I won't be returning next year, as most of you know. I'm retiring. You'll be getting a new teacher, Mr. Lemire. I've met him. I like him. I think he'll be a fine teacher. Perhaps a little more demanding than I am, so you better watch out. And I guess that's all, except for one thing. I wouldn't want to leave without commenting on the events of the past few weeks. You all know the facts that the Current Events Committee, to which I've been advisor for many years, invited James Boyd, the scientist, to speak here. I think you all know how I feel about Professor Boyd's theories. As it turned out, the community, or rather I should say the majority, decided that they took strong objections to Dr. Boyd's theories. And the majority has ruled. Professor Boyd did not speak here. I personally feel that the cancellation of his speech was a great loss, because I feel that the James Boyds of this world have a right to speak, as much right as the rest of us who don't hold views unpleasant and unpopular. The majority has ruled, and the majority in our country has the right to rule. But side by side with the concept of majority rule is the concept of protecting the minority from the passions of the majority. You see, if we could know for sure that what the majority decided was right and true, there wouldn't be any need to protect the minority. There wouldn't even be a minority. But we cannot know permanently what is right and what is true. And so we must never give in to the temptation to suppress what we don't believe in or agree with or find painful to hear. That's my view of our history. And I've never thought that history was something just to be read and studied. We have to believe it and live by it. The fact that something has been lost this time, well, it needn't be a permanent loss. Now, I've told you what I believe. It's up to you to decide what you believe.